The morning fog was thicker than usual that day, clinging low over the red clay roads of Elmswood, Alabama. The air carried a kind of stillness that made even the birds hesitate in their song. It was a Tuesday, April 9th, 1946, and the town should have been stirring with the usual chatter of children's feet, rushing toward the old schoolhouse that sat on the eastern edge of town. But the streets were silent. Martha Ellison stood by the school's wooden steps, her heels planted in the dust, clutching her keys tighter than she realized. The iron bell above the entrance had just sounded its first clang of the day, ringing into a void. She had unlocked the front doors precisely at 7:50, as she did every morning for the past 12 years, expecting the usual crowd of young faces. But no one had come. Her eyes swept across the horizon, toward the fields, the distant tree line, the narrow lanes of homes where smoke curled faintly from chimneys. Nothing moved. A chill brushed her skin, and she rubbed her arms despite the mild spring warmth. She stepped back inside the building, her shoes echoing sharply on the wooden floors, and peered into the quiet, empty halls. Desks waited. Blackboards were cleaned. Not a single backpack hung from the hooks by the coatroom. She paced slowly past the classrooms, listening for any sound, laughter, footsteps, a door creaking. But the silence persisted. She checked the clock. 8:05. Children in Elmswood weren't late. They were raised on discipline, routine, and the comforting cadence of bells. Outside again, she squinted through the mist, spotting Sheriff Clyde Mason's pickup truck pulling into the gravel lot. The tires crunched slowly, deliberately, as if the vehicle, too, was unsure about being there. Clyde stepped out, his tan hat already in his hand, eyes narrowed. "Morning, Martha," he said, his voice low. "Everything all right?" "I don't know," she replied, nodding toward the school. "The bell rang 5 minutes ago. Not a single child's shown up." The sheriff looked around, then checked his watch. "That's not like this town." "No, it isn't." They exchanged a glance, unspoken concern rising between them. He scratched his chin, brow furrowed. "Maybe something's happened. I'll go check around, see what I can find." As he turned to leave, Martha called after him, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you think something's wrong with them?" "All of them." He didn't answer. Back inside, Martha sat at her desk, trying not to panic. She ran through possibilities in her mind. Maybe a church gathering she hadn't heard of, a field trip, but nothing made sense. She had personally handed out notices on Friday about the math assessment scheduled for this morning. The children had even groaned about it. She stood again, walked to the window, and watched the mist begin to lift. The town slowly revealed itself. Quiet houses, closed shops, a single cat darting across the street. Still no children. Her fingers hovered over the telephone. Call who? The parents. The district office? A creeping dread began to settle in her stomach. Something was wrong, not in the way of illness or weather, but something deeper, something old. A faint memory tugged at the edge of her thoughts. Her grandmother's voice, trembling over bedtime stories, of children who vanished once every generation, always at the sound of a bell. She had dismissed it as folklore. Silly tales meant to frighten little girls into obedience, but now, standing alone in an empty schoolhouse, those stories didn't seem so silly. If you're already pulled into this unsettling mystery, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. There's more to Elmswood silence than meets the eye. Sheriff Clyde Mason didn't drive fast, not because he was lazy or cautious, but because he'd learned during the war that rushing into things usually meant trouble. He rolled down the window of his truck as he passed the corner store, nodding at the empty bench where old Tom Jenkins usually sat chewing tobacco and commenting on the weather. This morning the bench was deserted. That alone would have been enough to set him on edge. He turned toward Willow Street, where the houses of most schoolchildren lined both sides. Every porch was still. No children on bicycles, no mothers yelling for coats, no clatter of breakfast dishes from open windows. Clyde stopped at the Watsons' place first. He knocked once, twice, no answer. He tried the door. Locked. Curtains drawn. No sound inside. He moved on to the next house. The same, and the next. It was like the town had swallowed itself whole. Beds neatly made, meals half prepared, but no people. Just the eerie hush of a morning that should have been alive with noise. Back at the schoolhouse, Martha tried to keep herself occupied. She adjusted the lesson plans on her desk, erased and rewrote the date on the chalkboard, April 9th, 1946, and rechecked the attendance list. Her handwriting trembled slightly, as she stared at the rows of names, each one suddenly heavy with meaning. Martha had always been devoted to the school. Teaching was more than a profession, it was her sanctuary. After her husband David had been reported killed in action in France in '44, the school had become her reason to rise each morning. She poured herself into the children, Billy Thompson, who struggled with math but loved drawing, Susan Bell, who read faster than anyone in class, the twins Will and Andy, who always played pranks, and now every one of them was gone. She thought again about her grandmother's voice, the strange rhythm of that old tale, the bell, the silence, the missing children. It had always ended with a warning never to answer the door when the mist was thick. She shook her head. Superstition had no place in 1946. Still, the unease wouldn't leave her. The door creaked open behind her. She turned quickly, heart leaping, but it was Clyde. "Nothing," he said. His voice was gravel, softer than usual. "Houses are just empty, like they left in a hurry, but there's no sign of where or why." Martha swallowed hard. No one, not even parents. Not a soul, but something strange. Coffee pots are warm, bacon half-cooked on stoves. It's like they were interrupted. All at once. They sat in silence, both trying to digest the impossibility of it. Clyde looked out the window, jaw clenched. "This town's seen hard times, but never like this." Martha nodded. "Do you think we should contact Montgomery?" "Not yet. Not until we know more. Don't want to start a panic." She looked at him sharply. A panic might already be too late. He didn't respond, just rubbed the bridge of his nose and stood. "I'll head out toward the North Farms. Maybe someone out that way saw something." As he left, Martha turned to the school photo on the wall, a picture taken just last month. 32 children, all smiling under the spring sun. She traced their faces with her eyes one by one, lingering on each name, each grin. The weight in her chest pressed deeper. The silence outside was no longer just eerie, it was suffocating, like the town was holding its breath. And for the first time in years, Martha Ellison whispered a prayer, not for herself but for the children who had vanished without a trace. By noon the sun had burned away most of the mist, but the sense of unease in Elmswood only thickened. Clyde returned from the northern farms with the same grim report. Barn doors swung open, tractors left mid-field, animals fed but untended, and not a single child to be found. Even the farmhands and older siblings were gone. No footprints leading away, no vehicles missing, no signs of violence. Just a jarring, inexplicable void. Martha had brewed a pot of coffee in the teacher's lounge, but it sat untouched. She walked the halls again, her heels softer this time, each step slower. The silence no longer just hovered, it clung. She paused by the second-grade classroom and peeked in. A paper airplane rested on a desk, a crayon lay snapped in two, a cardigan hung from the back of a chair. Everything looked frozen in time. Back in the main office, Clyde leaned against the wall, his hat in his hands. "Martha," he said finally, "you ever hear stories? Strange ones? Old ones?" She looked up sharply. "You mean like folk tales? My grandmother used to tell things about disappearances, but I always thought they were just stories." "What kind of stories?" She hesitated, folding her arms tightly across her chest. She talked about a class of children, sometime around 1902, said they vanished on a spring morning just like this. School bell rang, doors opened, but the kids never showed up. The town never found them. Clyde nodded slowly. "My grandfather used to say something similar. Called it the hollowing. He never explained it, just said the bell was more than a bell, it was a call." They stared at each other for a long moment, neither speaking. The air between them seemed to hum. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, but it startled them both. Martha stepped toward the front door, heart pounding, and pulled it open. A man stood on the steps, thin, elderly, skin like leather, dressed in faded suspenders and a shirt that hadn't been white in decades. "You're the principal?" he asked in a gravelly voice. "I am." "I reckon you ought to know," he said, shifting uneasily. "Folks up near the West Ridge are talking. Say it's come again." "What has?" The old man scratched his jaw, looked behind him like he feared someone or something might be listening. "The calling. It don't come often, but when it do, it takes." Before they could ask more, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the dirt path without another word. Clyde muttered under his breath, "That's Walter Griggs. Lives out by the old mining trail. Doesn't talk to anyone. If he's speaking now, that's no good sign." Martha shivered. Calling. What does that even mean? I don't know, but I'm starting to think we need to take these stories more seriously. They didn't want to say it, but the fear was taking root. The logical explanations had evaporated. No flu outbreak, no abductions, no mass exodus, just children, gone, and a town too quiet. Outside, the wind picked up. It wasn't strong, but it carried something strange in it, a sound barely audible, faint, musical, like humming or singing. Martha stepped onto the porch, straining to hear. The melody was familiar, though she couldn't place it. A lullaby, maybe, a hymn. It sent a chill straight down her spine. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Clyde nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." The sound faded as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the breeze. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. At last, Martha turned back inside and said, almost to herself, "Something old is moving through this town, Clyde. Something older than either of us." He didn't argue. And as the sun began to sink behind the trees, the school bell, though untouched, let out a single, clear, solitary ring. By Wednesday morning, the quiet had become unbearable. The town was no longer just empty. It felt hollowed out, like something vital had been stripped away. Martha hadn't slept. Her mind spun in circles, replaying the stories, the bell, the melody on the wind. She needed answers, and she knew only one place in Elmswood kept records stretching back over a century. The First Baptist Church stood at the town centre, its steeple casting a long shadow over Main Street. Reverend Elijah Tate had been its pastor for nearly 2 decades. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a commanding presence and a voice like thunder wrapped in velvet. People respected him, feared him even, and he had a habit of knowing more than he let on. Martha approached the church just after dawn. The doors were unlocked, as always. The sanctuary was empty. The smell of old wood, candle wax, and dust filled the air. She made her way to the back where the church kept its archives. Ledgers, handwritten sermons, baptism lists, marriage licenses. Elijah found her there. "You're early," he said from the doorway, arms crossed. "I need to see the old records," Martha replied without looking up. 1900 to 1910. "What for?" She turned to face him. "Do you remember anything about a disappearance in 1902? Children that never made it to school?" His eyes narrowed just slightly, then softened. "There are always stories, ghost tales. You're letting fear get to you." "No," she said firmly. "I'm letting history guide me." He stepped aside. "Don't stay too long. The past has sharp teeth." She opened the logbook for 1902. The ink faded, but legible. On April 9th, the same date as today, there was a curious note. "No service held. Town in mourning. Young ones lost. Lord, give us strength." No names. No cause. Just those cryptic words. She flipped ahead. In May, another entry. "Special fast declared. Petitioned the Lord for mercy. Silence still grips our streets." And then in July, "The fields bloom again. Our offering accepted. No further children gone." Her breath caught. Offering. Martha pulled out another ledger, this one kept by the deacons. A different hand, a shakier script. It mentioned something called the Covenant of the Hollow, renewed every generation. There was no description, just the phrase repeated several times. "Do not break the silence. Do not stop the bell. Do not resist the hollow." She felt dizzy. A generation. Every generation. The math lined up. 1902, then 22 years later, 1924. She had been a child then, the schoolhouse fire. The nightmares she never fully understood. Had something been taken then, too? Footsteps behind her broke her trance. Reverend Tate stood close now, watching. "You've found enough." She looked up, her voice cold. "Why is this hidden?" He didn't flinch. "Because it protects us. Because there are things older than this church, older than this land, that do not forget. And because sometimes fear is safer than knowledge. You knew this could happen again. I hoped it wouldn't. But hope is not a promise." Martha stood, gathering the ledgers. "People deserve to know." "People deserve peace," he replied. "You'll start a fire that can't be put out." She pushed past him, her mind set. "Then let it burn." Outside, the morning sun warmed her face, but the chill inside her remained. The truth she'd uncovered was ancient, buried in scripture and secrecy. Something had been taken before, and something was being taken again. And now, she couldn't stop hearing the phrase that echoed through those brittle pages. "Do not stop the bell. Do not resist the hollow." But Martha Ellison had never been good at obeying rules meant to silence the truth. Clyde met Martha outside the church, his face pale beneath the shadow of his hat. He had just come from the eastern ridge and brought no better news. "Still nothing," he said quietly. "Not even footprints in the dust." Martha held up the ledgers, her hands trembling. "There's something wrong with this town, Clyde. Something old, something buried." He looked at the books, then into her eyes. "What do they say?" she told him. "About the Covenant, about the disappearances in 1902, about the fire in 1924, about the cryptic words, 'offering accepted.'" He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "I've heard that phrase before," he muttered. "From one of the old men who used to work the mill." Her eyes narrowed. "The cotton mill?" "Yeah, the original one. Not the new building, they built that in '39. I mean the one on the riverbank. Abandoned now, shut down right after the war started. There's stories." "What kind of stories?" "That some parts of it were never used for cotton, that they had rooms underground. Locked rooms." Without another word, they drove there. The old mill stood like a skeleton of the past. Brick walls cracked by time, windows blown out, the iron gate rusted shut. They climbed through a break in the fence and crossed the lot, the earth dry and littered with brittle weeds. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and ash. Clyde led her down a narrow stairwell that spiraled into darkness. They used lanterns to light the way, their breath visible in the cold air below. The basement was wide and low, with beams holding up sagging rafters. Dust danced in the lantern light. They passed rusted machines, empty crates, and finally came to a door that looked oddly well preserved. Oak, reinforced with iron bands. Clyde tested the handle. It creaked open with a groan. The room beyond was unlike anything they expected. Lined along the walls were shelves. On them sat dozens of small shoes, scuffed, mismatched, coated in dust. Stacked beside them were schoolbooks, slates, broken pencils. A tiny stuffed bear, its ear torn, sat in one corner. The air was thick with rot and memory. Martha stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. "What is this place?" Clyde didn't answer. He moved to a wooden table in the center. On it lay a school roster from 1902, the same names she had seen in the church logs, but beside each one was a symbol, drawn in red ink or something darker. A symbol she'd seen before, etched into the church's foundation. A circle split by 3 jagged lines. She ran her fingers along the roster, then looked at the shelves again. The children hadn't vanished into thin air. They had been brought here, remembered here. "Someone made this into a shrine," she whispered. "A tomb." They stood in silence until Clyde broke it with a low murmur. "Someone told me once, before the war, that there's a price for peace, that every town pays it differently. Maybe this was Elmswood's." "No," Martha said. "This wasn't payment. This was a pact." She turned to leave, but something caught her eye. Scratched into the far wall, almost invisible. A phrase, "The bell is the gate. Do not silence it." Outside, the wind had picked up again. But beneath it, faint and persistent, came that same melody they'd heard the day before. This time, clearer. Children's voices. Laughing, singing, but no footsteps followed. Martha looked at Clyde. "Whatever this is, it's not finished." He nodded, jaw clenched. "Then neither are we." That night, Martha didn't return to her home. Instead, she sat in her car outside the schoolhouse, watching the building under the pale glow of a crescent moon. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. The silence wasn't just around her now. It was inside her, the kind that echoes through memory. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, she was 8 years old again. It was spring of 1924, and the schoolhouse had looked almost the same. Wooden beams, dusty windows, laughter filling the air. She remembered the feel of her mother's hand brushing her hair, the green ribbon tied at the end of her braid, the scent of chalk and floor polish. But that day hadn't ended like the others. The fire had started just after recess. No one knew how. It moved fast, too fast. The roof collapsed before the last bell had even rung. She had been in the cloakroom hiding, not out of fear but as part of a game. Hide and seek, that's what she told herself later. But now, with the town silent, the school empty again, and those records whispering of lost children, a different memory returned. She hadn't been alone. There had been someone else in the cloakroom, a girl, older, unfamiliar, dressed in grey. She hadn't spoken, only watched Martha from the corner with eyes too dark, too still. Martha remembered her clearly now, even though she'd buried that face for over 20 years. When the fire began, the girl had smiled, and then walked away, straight into the flames. No one ever mentioned her afterward. No one else had seen her. The fire had been blamed on faulty wiring. They rebuilt the school. Life moved on, but not for Martha. Back in the present, she stepped out of the car, her legs stiff, heart heavy. She crossed the gravel yard, moved through the empty halls, and stood once again in the cloakroom. Moonlight filtered through the narrow window. Dust floated in still air. She stared at the corner, empty, but the memory lingered like smoke. She walked to her office, unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a small cedar box. Inside were mementos, David's military badge, a photo of her parents, the green ribbon from her childhood braid. Beneath them all, a folded piece of paper, yellowed, edges curled. She hadn't looked at it in years. It was a drawing she'd made after the fire, one her mother had found under her pillow. Crayons scratched hard across the page, a girl in grey standing by a burning schoolhouse. No face, just dark circles for eyes. Martha had no memory of drawing it. Her mother had assumed it was trauma, a child's mind trying to understand. Now Martha wasn't so sure. She turned the paper over. On the back, in her own uneven handwriting, she opened the door and said my name. A cold sweat broke across her back. Had she been chosen then? Spared or marked? The questions piled up, twisting her breath short. She folded the drawing, placed it back in the box, and returned it to the drawer. Her mind screamed for rest, but her heart kept pounding louder now, like a drum calling her forward. She needed answers, not just about the children or the town, but about herself. Because the more she remembered, the more it felt like she wasn't just witnessing this horror. She was part of it, and whatever had come to Elmswood in 1946, it had touched her before. Thursday morning came, and with it, a dense, unnatural heat, the kind that made the air feel heavy even before the sun cleared the trees. Clyde met Martha at the school, the shadows under his eyes darker than usual. I didn't sleep, he said. Spent the night going through my grandfather's old trunk. She didn't speak, only nodded. He held up a bundle, old leather-bound journals, frayed maps, and a silver compass that no longer pointed north. I think he knew, Clyde continued, back then, about the pattern, about what was coming. They spread the contents across Martha's desk. The journals were written in a cramped, looping script, difficult to read, but Clyde had already studied them. Every 22 years, he said. April, always a school day, always children. The numbers change, but the date stays the same. Martha ran her finger along the ink, tracing the names. Dates matched the school records, matched the stories. Her own class in 1924, a smaller group in 1902. Even older notes suggested something happened in 1880, though the details had been lost in time. Did anyone ever try to stop it? She asked. Doesn't say, but it does say one thing. The path draws inward. The hollow claims from the center first. She looked at him, confused. He unrolled one of the maps, an aerial drawing of Elmswood from decades earlier, with hand-marked red dots over certain homes, certain streets. Each dot had a name and date. As they studied it, a pattern began to emerge. It's a spiral, Martha whispered. They're disappearing in a spiral. Clyde nodded. From the outer farms to the central square. Always moving inward. Where's the center? He reached for another page, revealing a sketch overlay of the town's landmarks. His finger landed on a darkened section of forest west of town. Widow's Hollow, he said. Martha frowned. I've heard that name. The kids used to dare each other to go out there. My grandfather always said never to step near it. Said the ground there was never meant to hold roots, that it forgets what you bury. The name alone felt cold. Widow's Hollow, a place swallowed by shadow and silence. It wasn't marked on official town maps anymore. Most people pretended it didn't exist. She leaned back in her chair, heart racing. So if the pattern holds, then the center is next, Clyde finished. Tomorrow. They stared at each other, neither ready to say what came next. It was already Thursday. The disappearances had begun days ago. If there was a window to act, it was closing fast. Martha looked at the compass again. The needle spun slowly, never settling. Whatever this is, it's not just a ritual, it's alive. I think it's tied to the land, Clyde said. Something that was brought here, or unearthed. And somehow the town made a deal with it. She closed her eyes, felt the weight of everything pressing down, and we've been feeding it ever since. They sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock above the chalkboard. Each second, a reminder of what was coming. At last, Martha stood. "I'm going out there." "To Widow's Hollow?" Clyde asked. "Yes. If that's where it ends, then maybe that's where it begins." He didn't try to stop her. Instead, he gathered the maps and journals. "Then I'm coming with you." She met his gaze. "Do you believe we can stop it?" "No," he said quietly, "but I believe we have to try." And outside, beneath the weight of the sky, the bell at the school rang once more, though no hand touched it. By late afternoon, the sky had shifted from blue to a muted grey, casting a colourless veil over the forest edge. Martha and Clyde stood at the entrance of Widow's Hollow, facing a thicket of twisted trees and thorny brush. The air here felt different, warmer, denser, as though it carried breath of its own. "No one's come out here in decades," Clyde said, machete in hand. "At least not anyone who came back talking." "Then it's time someone did," Martha replied. They stepped into the brush, moving carefully along a path that barely existed anymore. The forest swallowed sound. Their footsteps were muffled, birds silent, no wind. The deeper they went, the more unnatural everything became. Roots curled like grasping fingers. Branches twisted together in shapes that made Martha's stomach churn. She thought of the phrase scratched into the mill wall. "The bell is the gate. Do not silence it." The silence here was overwhelming. After nearly an hour, the path opened into a circular clearing. In its center stood a low stone altar, half buried in moss and earth. Around it were scattered remnants, rusted toys, broken shoes, scraps of fabric weathered by time. Martha knelt, brushing dirt from a small metal button. It bore the same spiral symbol from the school ledger. "They were brought here," she whispered. "All of them." Clyde walked slowly around the altar. "You feel that?" "What?" "The hum. In the ground. Like something's breathing under us." She stood, heart pounding. "What is this place?" He didn't answer. They examined the stones, noticing more carvings, circles, jagged lines, and rows of tiny notches. 32, the same number as the missing children. Martha's hand trembled as she traced them. Then came the laughter, faint, far off, but unmistakably children. They froze. The sound didn't come from the trees. It came from below. Clyde moved toward a patch of earth near the altar, where leaves had gathered in a shallow depression. He knelt, brushed them away, revealing a flat stone with a rusted iron ring in the center. "A door," he said. Together they heaved it open. A cold gust of air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp soil and something else, something old. A tunnel led downward, carved into the earth, lined with rotting wooden supports. Martha hesitated, then climbed in first. The passage narrowed quickly. They crawled for what felt like miles, guided only by lantern light. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber, a wide circular room with a domed ceiling of stone. Along the walls were niches, each containing small personal items, toys, ribbons, crayons. At the center stood another bell. It was smaller than the one at the school, but nearly identical in shape. Its base was carved with strange markings that shimmered faintly in the lantern glow. Martha reached for it, but Clyde caught her hand. "Don't," he said. "This place, it feels alive." A new sound filled the chamber. Soft chanting, unintelligible, layered in voices. The light from the lanterns flickered wildly. Then a shadow passed across the wall, tall, thin, inhuman. Martha backed away, her voice a whisper. "We're not alone." Clyde gripped his pistol, though they both knew it would be useless. They turned and climbed back up the tunnel, lungs burning, hearts thudding like drums. As they burst into the clearing, the air snapped with cold. The laughter was gone. The forest was still. They slammed the stone door shut and stepped away. Martha stared down at the altar, eyes wide. "This isn't just history. It's happening again. Right now." Clyde nodded, face pale. "And we're running out of time." The next morning, the first rays of sunlight broke over Elmswood, but they brought no warmth. Martha and Clyde returned from Widow's Hollow in silence. What they had seen was not something words could explain. Not fully. The images clung to them, burned into the edges of their minds. Back in town, things had changed. A tension simmered in the air. Doors that had been left ajar were now firmly shut, curtains drawn, candles burned in windows, and scripture verses had been nailed to doorframes. "They know," Martha said as they passed the church. "Even if they won't say it." Clyde nodded. Or maybe they always did. They turned toward the town archive, a dusty brick building tucked behind City Hall. It wasn't used often, but Clyde had a key. Inside they found a ledger marked Property and Council Records, 1880-1905. Martha flipped through the brittle pages until she found a meeting held on May 2, 1902. The minutes were vague, but one entry stood out. Motion passed to honor the Pact of Peace. Elders agree on terms. Children shall be guided. The hollow will remain sealed. There were 6 signatures below. Martha traced them with her finger. These men, these families, they made the decision. It wasn't taken from them, it was offered. Clyde leaned over her shoulder. Offered to what? She turned the page. More names, more references to guiding the children, to holding the line, and one chilling phrase repeated again and again: "Let not the bell be silenced. Let not the hollow hunger." They sat in stunned silence. The town hadn't been cursed, it had struck a deal. Martha rose and walked toward a dusty cabinet marked Personal Files, Clergy. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Tate Elijah, 1925, Present. Inside were sermons, handwritten notes, and tucked at the back, a letter written on yellowed parchment. It was dated 1946, just a month ago. "Reverend Tate," it began as the cycle draws near, "we write to reaffirm our guardianship. The hollow cannot be denied. The children must be claimed, or the town will pay its debt in full. You are the keeper now. Do what must be done, and do not look back." No signature, no return address, but the seal at the top was unmistakable, 3 jagged lines within a circle, the same symbol etched into the altar, the same as in the school records. This was never about faith, Martha said bitterly. It was preservation, self-preservation. Clyde stared at the letter, his voice low. They fed their own to protect themselves. And Tate knew. The anger in her chest ignited like a spark. He preached peace and salvation, while guarding a secret that let generations of children vanish. Clyde took the letter, folded it, and tucked it into his coat. "We need to confront him." "No," Martha said. "We need to expose him." They returned to the school and began collecting everything. The ledgers, the church logs, the altar photos, the journals. Every page, every symbol. Martha typed a statement, her fingers furious over the keys. She stapled it to a board and pinned it to the school's front doors. It read, "The children of Elmswood did not vanish. They were given. By names you know. By hands you trust. Read what they hoped you'd forget." Then they waited. By mid-afternoon, townspeople had begun to gather. Whispers filled the air. Eyes scanned the documents. Murmurs turned to gasps. Some wept. Others turned away in shame or denial. And then came Reverend Tate, walking up the school steps, face grave. He looked at Martha, then at Clyde. "You don't understand what you've done." "Oh," Martha replied coldly. "We do." Behind her, the school bell gave another slow ring. This time it sounded like a warning. That evening, as dusk spread over Elmswood, the church bell began to ring. Not the school bell this time, but the great bronze one atop the First Baptist steeple. Deep, sonorous, deliberate. It echoed through the streets like a pulse, one that reached into homes and hearts alike. Martha stood by the schoolhouse door, watching the townspeople drift toward the church. No one spoke. They moved as if summoned. Clyde joined her. "It's a midnight mass," he said. "Tate's calling everyone together, trying to regain control, or finish what was started." They followed the crowd, arriving as the last pews filled. Reverend Tate stood at the pulpit, robe pressed, eyes hollow. The sanctuary lights cast long shadows along the walls. Bibles rested untouched in laps. Every face stared forward, drawn, tense. He raised his hands. "Brothers and sisters of Elmswood, we are a people of faith, of sacrifice, of covenant." The word echoed, covenant, not faith, not hope, covenant. He continued, "For generations, we have walked a path few understand, one of protection, of duty, and now the burden returns." Martha rose from her seat, her voice sharp. "How you mean the offering?" A ripple went through the congregation. Tate didn't falter. "You've seen the truth, Mrs. Ellison. You've felt the weight. You know this town survives not through might, but through obedience." She stepped into the aisle. Obedience to what? To the hollow? To a thing that demands our children vanish every 22 years? Tate's eyes narrowed. To a reality older than this land, one our ancestors accepted. A pact that spares the many for the price of the few. The few, Martha shouted. You mean Billy Thompson, Susan Bell, Will and Andy, children with names and dreams. You call that mercy? A silence followed. Sharp, electric. Then Clyde stood beside her, holding up the letter, the ledgers, the journals. He's hidden this from you all. Buried the truth beneath sermons and scripture. This is not salvation, it's submission. A woman sobbed near the back. A man covered his face with shaking hands. Some stood, others sat, unmoving. Tate's voice softened. Do you not see the blessings we've kept? No war touched our soil, no sickness lingered long. While the world burned, we endured, because we honored the gate. We honored the bell. Martha stepped forward. Then maybe it's time we stop honoring fear. A murmur spread through the crowd. Doubt. Defiance. Tate looked out, and for the first time, his voice trembled. You don't understand what that means. Then tell us, Clyde challenged. Tell us what happens when the bell is silenced. Tate closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. Less defiance, more desperation. It doesn't stop, he said softly. It comes, it takes, without order, without mercy. The pact holds it in place. It's not a god, it's not a demon. It simply is. And if we break the cycle, we set it free, Martha finished. We know. She turned to the congregation. But that doesn't mean we keep feeding it. We find another way. A long silence. Then slowly people began to stand. Not in protest, but in solidarity. Tate's shoulders sagged. You're choosing doom. No, Martha said. We're choosing our children. And from the shadows of the church, a sound returned. Children's laughter. Soft, faint. Just enough to chill every spine. Martha looked to the door, eyes narrowing. They're calling again. Clyde nodded. Then it's time to answer. Friday morning arrived under a sky the color of bruised slate. Clouds hung low, dragging the air with them, and nothing in Elmswood stirred. No roosters crowed, no footsteps broke the hush. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath. Martha sat in the schoolhouse office, scanning the shortwave radio. Clyde leaned against the wall, arms crossed, both of them listening to the static rise and fall. Then it happened. A voice. Small. Faint. A child's voice, humming. Martha froze. The dial hadn't moved. The frequency was one used by local farms for weather reports, not music. But now it carried something soft, melodic. Several voices joined, singing in unison. A lullaby. Words indistinct, but haunting. It's them, she whispered. The children. Clyde moved to the window. It's coming from all directions, like it's inside the wires. The humming grew stronger. A chorus now. Familiar tones layered with distant laughter, as though carried on waves too long for this world. They left the building and stepped into the street. The air vibrated gently, not with sound, but something deeper, resonant. The townspeople emerged from homes, faces pale, drawn by the same melody. It wasn't just coming from radios now. It was in the wind, in the soil, in their bones. Reverend Tate appeared in the churchyard, robe askew, eyes wild. He fell to his knees and covered his ears, muttering prayers between clenched teeth. Others followed, sobbing or praying aloud. The effect was total, like the town had become one great chamber of echoes. Clyde turned to Martha. If they're reaching out, maybe they're not lost. She nodded. Maybe they're caught, waiting. They returned to the schoolhouse. Inside, the walls pulsed with the song. As they crossed the threshold, the air changed again, heavier, colder. Martha paused. This is where it began. The humming swelled, a rush of overlapping voices that rose like a wave, and then abrupt silence. The school bell rang, but not from the tower, from the hallway. Clyde drew his weapon out of instinct, stepping into the corridor. There, hanging from a hook outside the cloakroom, was a small handheld bell. Brass, weathered, vibrating gently. Martha picked it up. It felt warm, pulsing slightly in her hand. This was in the photo, she whispered. From 1924. I remember it. A gust of air moved down the hall. Lockers rattled. Light bulbs flickered. Then came the voices, whispers, distant but unmistakable. Names, repeated over and over. Billy, Susan, Andy, Ellie. She dropped the bell. It hit the ground but made no sound. And from the cloakroom door came a knock. 1, 2, 3. Clyde stepped forward, hand on the knob. Martha, he said, If something's behind this door, then we face it. He opened it. No one was there. But inside, written on the wall in what looked like chalk, was a single sentence: "Bring us home." Martha stared, her heart racing. They're not gone. They're trapped. Or held. In the hollow? Clyde asked. Maybe. Or between. The chalk began to move on its own, writing more words beneath the first line. Don't let them ring the gate again. They're warning us, she said. Whatever is coming next, it will finish what was started. Outside, the clouds swirled. The bell at the church tower rang once more, but this time the sound was hollow, not metal, bone. The town gathered at twilight, drawn not by invitation but instinct. Families stood in clusters, eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the church steeple, where the trees of Widow's Hollow loomed like watchful sentinels. No one spoke, yet all knew what had to be done. Martha and Clyde stood before them, maps and pages clutched in hand. It ends tonight, she said. Or it never ends. Reverend Tate stepped forward from the crowd. He looked older now, bent under something heavier than age. You can't stop what's been in motion for 100 years. Then we change its course, Clyde replied. We break the pattern. Tate shook his head. You have no idea what waits beyond that altar, what wakes when the bell is silenced. We are not its enemy. We are its servants. Martha faced him. Not anymore. They turned toward Widow's Hollow. A group followed, dozens armed not with weapons, but with resolve. Lanterns flickered like fireflies as they crossed the edge of town and vanished into the trees. The hollow greeted them with a silence that swallowed sound. Roots twisted underfoot. Branches parted without touch. The deeper they walked, the heavier the air became. Then came the song. Children's voices, layered and distant, rising from the earth. They reached the clearing. The altar was waiting. The stone had changed since Martha's last visit. Now it pulsed faintly with red light, as if something beneath it was alive. Around it stood 6 figures, hooded, still, cloaked in robes, stitched with the spiral sigil. Elders of the town, faces hidden, hands raised. Clyde's breath caught. It's them, the descendants of the pact. Tate stepped into the clearing, joining them without hesitation. You were never meant to see this. Martha moved beside the altar, holding up the church logs, the letter, the ledgers. The truth is written, all of it, your bloodlines. Your bargains. One of the hooded figures spoke, a woman, voice trembling. If we do not offer, it will take everything. It already has, Martha answered. Our children, our hope, our future. A low rumble stirred the ground. The altar flared brighter. The bell beside it, a crude twin of the schools, began to rise from the earth, drawn by unseen force. Its surface shimmered, not metal, but bone fused with rust. Runes glowed along its rim. It's begun, Tate cried. You've brought it early. No, Martha said. You've fed it for too long. We're here to end it. She reached for the bell. A roar split the sky. The wind exploded outward, knocking half the crowd to the ground. The trees bent backward. Light poured from the altar in streams. And from the shadows behind it a shape emerged. Tall, twisted, impossible. A thing of limbs and teeth and empty eyes, stitched from darkness and memory. It moved without walking, breathed without lungs. It had no mouth, yet the sound of children screaming came from it, echoes from those long taken. Clyde raised his lantern high. Get them out of here, he shouted to the townspeople. Run! But Martha stood her ground. She held the bell in both hands now, its weight burning through her skin. I remember you, she said aloud. From the fire, from the cloakroom. You touched me once, but not this time. The creature paused. Its empty sockets turned toward her. Martha struck the bell against the altar. The sound that followed was not a chime. It was a scream. The creature recoiled. The figures in robes cried out, and the clearing burst with light. The clearing erupted in brilliance. The bell's scream lingered in the air like an open wound, pulsing through the ground and sky. The creature reeled back, its shape unraveling at the edges, shadows tearing away like fabric in firelight. The altar cracked down its middle, spilling a blinding white light that seared the darkness from every crevice. Martha clung to the bell, her hands blistered, her legs weak, but she didn't stop. She raised it again and struck it once more against the stone. The second toll shattered the silence of generations. The hooded figures collapsed to the ground. Some cried out, others simply wept. Reverend Tate knelt, eyes wide, mouthing something silent, perhaps prayer, or perhaps horror. The creature screamed. A sound with no source, no direction, yet it filled every soul with dread. Trees split, rocks trembled, and then through the chaos came a different sound. Laughter, familiar, clear, children's laughter. It spilled from the altar, from the soil, from the air itself. And with it the wind changed, cool, clean like the first breath of morning. Shapes began to emerge in the light, small shapes, children. One by one they stepped from the brightness, blinking, confused, unharmed. Billy Thompson, Susan Bell, the twins, 32 of them, hands shielding their eyes as if waking from a long dream. Martha dropped the bell. Tears blurred her vision as she rushed to them, kneeling, wrapping her arms around the nearest child. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're home." But the light had not faded. The creature had not vanished. It surged toward the altar in desperation, reaching for the bell. Clyde stepped forward, blood on his forehead, a lantern in one hand, a pistol in the other. "No," he said. A shot rang out, not at the creature, but at the bell. The bullet struck its base, the bell cracked. A shockwave burst outward, silent but brutal. Martha was thrown backward, the children pulled from her arms. The altar exploded in a flash of white and gold, and when the light finally dimmed, the creature was gone, the altar was gone, the bell was gone. All that remained was silence. And Clyde, lying motionless near the center of the clearing. Martha crawled to him, breath shallow, voice shaking. "No, no, please." His eyes opened faintly. "We did it. You saved them," she whispered, tears falling freely. His lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "Maybe now Elmswood will remember." And then he was still. The forest was quiet. The children stood in a circle, staring at the spot where the altar had been. They didn't cry, they didn't speak. They simply held hands. Martha sat beside Clyde's body, heart broken and full at once. Around her, the others began to arrive. The townspeople who had followed, those who had once kept the secret. Some knelt, some bowed their heads, some simply stood in silence. There was no victory song, no fanfare. Just 32 children returned, and one man lost. As the stars appeared above the hollow for the first time in decades, Martha rose and faced the gathered crowd. "This place is closed now," she said. "No more bells, no more pacts. Let this be the last hollow." And deep within the woods, the wind whispered in agreement. The morning after the hollow cracked open, Elmswood awoke to a silence that no longer suffocated. It was a silence of reverence, of recovery. The mist that had lingered for days had lifted. Birds sang. Leaves moved with honest wind. The children were home. They sat quietly in the schoolyard, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot milk and eating fresh bread. Some clung to one another. Others sat alone, gazes distant. No one forced questions. No one demanded answers. What mattered was their presence. They were here. Martha moved among them, gently, carefully. She spoke each name aloud, just to feel the miracle in her throat. Inside the school, a space was prepared. Not for lessons, but for remembrance. Clyde's hat was placed on his desk, his badge on the wall. A single white rose rested beside his photograph. The town gathered for him that afternoon. It wasn't a formal ceremony. There was no clergy, no speeches, just townsfolk walking through the halls of the school, some in silence, some in tears, leaving offerings of thanks. A note, a flower, a child's drawing. One by one, they honored the man who gave them back their future. Martha stood beside the window, watching them come and go. She didn't cry. She had done that already. Alone in the cloakroom, where the chalk still bore the words, "Bring us home." She had wept until her lungs gave out, until only quiet remained. And then she began to write. She documented everything, every name, every date, every page of the ledgers. She wrote of the pact, the bell, the altar, and the thing that had lived beneath their feet. She named the guardians. She recorded the rituals. She told the truth. Her story would not be buried. Not this time. Outside, the children had begun to speak again, slowly, hesitantly. Some remembered nothing. Others described dreams of warm light, endless corridors, and voices that sang to them in circles. One child, Ellie, told Martha about a girl in grey who had held her hand. "She said you'd come," Ellie whispered. "She said you wouldn't forget." Martha swallowed hard, nodded once, and let the child rest. Later, she found Reverend Tate standing at the edge of the churchyard, his robe gone, his Bible under his arm. He looked smaller, older. "I won't stay," he said before she could speak. "There's nothing left for me here." "No," Martha replied, "there isn't." He walked away, slow and unchallenged, disappearing down the road that led nowhere in particular. By evening, the town was different. Not healed, but open. People spoke to neighbors again. Doors unlocked. Candles were no longer for protection, but remembrance. Children played, tentatively, cautiously, but with real laughter. Martha sat alone on the school steps as the sun sank behind the trees. Her hands were ink-stained, her heart still sore, but a peace had settled in her chest. The kind that doesn't erase pain, but honors it. She looked to the horizon, to the distant line where the hollow once breathed in silence, and she whispered, "No more." The wind answered softly. Weeks passed, and spring fully claimed Elmswood. Grass grew thicker around the schoolhouse. Wildflowers sprouted near the fence line. Birds returned to the trees, their songs no longer muffled by unseen tension. Life had begun to mend itself, not perfectly, but truthfully. Martha continued teaching. Not all the children had returned to class immediately. Some needed time, others healing. But when they did come back, they brought with them a strange sort of wisdom. Quiet eyes, thoughtful words, as if they had seen something of the world beyond it. She never asked them to explain. Some things she'd learned are better honored in silence. At home she wrote late into the night, her journal swelling with memories and facts, with names no one would forget again. She sent copies of her account to county officials, to archives, to distant colleges. Most never replied. A few thanked her politely, but none dared call it fiction. She didn't write for them. She wrote so the past would never again become future. The school bell remained. It still rang each morning, but now it was struck only once, never twice, never three, and never again in the mist. One quiet Sunday morning, a stranger came into town. A girl, barely 15, wearing a grey dress and holding a bundle of dried herbs. She walked up to Martha on the steps of the church and said nothing, only placed the bundle at her feet and nodded once before turning back toward the road. Martha watched her go. Some memories never vanish. They simply return, in new form. As summer neared, she and the townsfolk planted a circle of oaks at the edge of Widow's Hollow. No one stepped beyond them. They placed a sign that read, simply, "We remember." And they did. Martha aged, but slowly. Her hands wore the years, but her eyes stayed sharp. She kept Clyde's photo on her desk. Children would sometimes ask who he was. She'd smile and say, "He kept the town awake." On the 20th anniversary of that April morning, the town gathered. No one vanished. The bells rang once, and then were still. The story lived now in memory, not in fear. But stories have long roots. One summer evening, Martha received a letter from a small town in Georgia. It was brief. "Mrs. Ellison, our children didn't show up for school this morning. Do you still have the map?" She sat with the letter for a long time. The world, it seemed, was larger than Elmswood, and the hollow, perhaps, deeper than they'd known. Still, she smiled. They had broken one chain. Others could be broken too, and if someone, somewhere, chose to remember, then there was always hope. If you've followed this story to the end, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more haunting, powerful stories like this one. True inspired, emotionally grounded, and unforgettable. And if you're still curious about what happened in that next town, click the video on screen now. The Hollow isn't done whispering.